Hey everybody, welcome to Buzzing About Romance. I am Leah, and on this episode of Buzzing About Romance, we are doing an author spotlight, quick shot of romance, and we are welcoming author Walker Rose to the podcast. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. Glad to be here.
Okay, so we are talking about Walker Rose's newest release, Bourbon Summer. I'm going to read your bio real quick.
Okay.
I live the dream in my own slice of paradise when I get to enjoy colorful sunsets from my rocking chair while I'm working. I have my very own romance hero with Mr. Rose, and here there's more than a few little rosebuds running around. A couple aren't so little anymore. We keep things interesting with cats and a dog and the critters that roam through the yard. Fingers crossed, the mountain lions stay away.
Yeah, they're getting closer. I've heard.
That's
Our,
horrible.
I know our neighbors, and they're not like even a mile away, but in their pastures, I think they spotted one like a few months ago.
Yeah.
So like we've started having our daughter, we have to take the garbage, our driveway's like 100 yards long.
Uh-huh.
And takes the garbage out every Sunday. And of course she waits till last minute, like
As
10:30.
as
And
one
I've
does.
started being like, can you do it during daylight? Like I don't want you hunted out there.
Well, do they only hunt at night though?
I don't know.
I don't think they're nocturnal.
I've just asked her so to do it in daylight makes me feel better because we have a lot of coyotes. I
Oh
never know
yeah.
how people say them, but we have tons of coyotes around here too.
Thinking about coyotes, have you seen the video where there was a coyote in like the Aldi and they had to like pull it out of like the cold, like
Oh,
like it was in like the vegetable thing and they like yanked it out by its tail.
wow.
I'll have to find the video to share with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like the worker was like trying to dig something out, and I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
it's gonna be like a rat or something like that. And he pulled this like giant, like fuzzy tail, and it just
Wow.
kept coming.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
And they're not like small.
No, I don't know how it fit in there, to be honest, but I digress. All
Yeah.
right, so let's get to know you as an author a little bit.
Okay.
So what initially drew you to the romance genre as a writer?
I think it was the emotions because I am uncomfortable with emotions, showing
Okay.
emotions, feeling them. So I think I like the romance. You go on the journey and you know there's a happy ending at the end.
Hmm.
And I think that's my struggle writing it too, is bringing out the emotion because why can't everyone just have a reasonable conversation and, come to an understanding? So I have a harder time bringing the emotion. And so that helped me figure out like that's why I like reading it is weathering all those different emotions because I'm
Hmm.
pretty even keeled in real life.
Yeah.
I'll go on my rants, but I'm not a hugely dramatic person, I guess.
Yeah. I I have a flair for the drama personally,
I
but
have
that's just me.
one girl who I have three girls
Okay.
and a boy. And it's odd because they are more even keeled like I am and like my husband is. But there's one who's a little less even keeled.
Is she
And
the second
yeah.
child?
Um, I think she's one of the middle ones, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of goes. I keep seeing those like reels or like memes going around. It's like, tell me which child would do this, and then tell me why it's your second
Yeah.
born.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, there's a lot of truth into that statement.
Yes. And the youngest is very much being the youngest.
Yeah, see, I am the youngest of three, and I am pretty much your typical youngest child.
Yeah.
So,
She's giving us a run for our money.
I mean, somebody has to.
Yeah. Sharpen those parent skills before you quit using them.
So, can you share any rituals or habits that help you stay focused and productive during your process?
I don't have any official ones. I like to get stuff done before I sit down and do a stretch of writing because I don't like
Hmm.
those little to-do distractions. Um, the best place for me to write and where I really try to write is my kids' practice sitting in my car because then I don't have Wi-Fi
Yeah.
and I can't like wander off somewhere or have my business admin stuff to do, and I get the
Hmm.
best word count sitting in my car. But otherwise at home, I do, I've got to check Instagram and check my email and check
Hmm.
threads and check. I got to go through all the social medias and then get
Yeah.
some of the easier tasks done first. And then I can sit down and write for a while. Because
Hmm.
when I get into my writing, I don't like to come back out of it.
Yeah. I mean, you're not the only one because there have been two or three authors have like posted about how much they enjoy writing in their car.
Oh, it's
Actually,
great.
I think it was last year, maybe the year before. Well, and she still does it, but Krista Sandor said the only place she could write the one book she was doing was in her car. Like she would sit in her garage at her house and sit in her car because apparently that is where like the juices flowed the
Yeah,
best. There's just
I've
something about her
considered
car.
that.
Hey,
But I haven't
whatever
done it yet.
works.
But my daughter, she plays college volleyball now, but and all my kids are in some sort of, well, competitive sport or
Uh-huh.
basketball, which feels as much of an endurance as a club sport because they are practicing all the time.
Yeah.
But when my oldest daughter started to drive and could go to her own club volleyball practices, I'm like, why am I having such a hard time meeting word count? I can't get any of these words right. And I can't. And then I realized it's because I'm not sitting outside of a school for an hour and a half every night.
Well, that's the thing. Like some of those practices, they are long and drawn out. And
Yeah.
depending on like where you live and how you live, like it's a hike.
Yeah. And I have to, so like my daughter that's in basketball has a 2 hour practice Sunday. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah. You're like,
And
I
the friend that she
volunteer.
goes with, they like it because they're like, well, I can take them if you want to pick them up. I'm like, no, I'll take them. I'll
You're
sit
like,
there
I
and
got
work.
this.
I'm good.
I got this.
Please let me take them. I need to take them.
So for your books themselves, do you plot out the stories or do you let it come to you in pants?
Let it come to me. I'm a
Hmm.
pantser.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll know, usually it's the beginning, and I really like writing the beginnings, and I think of an opening and get excited about it. And I really don't like to start writing a book until I'm excited about the opening.
Okay.
And then after that, it's just like going through the forest in the dark. I've learned that I can make it through the forest, so I don't stress about it. But
Yeah.
the middle is really hard for me because I do pants a lot. Um, but there are some that come to me a little more fully formed, I
Okay.
guess,
It really just depends
especially
on the
if,
story.
yeah. And earlier, I think the earlier in the series, the harder it is.
Hmm.
um, in a way, because well, because by then you need a big family gathering, and you
Yeah.
need um, maybe another family gathering where they have to tell one of the main characters to get their heads out of their behinds and whatever. So you do get some natural scenes that are already built in, and I found that with Bourbon Sunset is book 6, and that one came out really nice
Hmm.
because Bourbon Summer was, I think, the hardest book I've ever written. It just was hard.
Okay, we'll come back to that because I'm
Okay.
curious why you think that. But
Yeah. Looking back, I don't know why, but it was miserable. And I like the character, I like the story. Um, but it was almost, yeah, we can come back to that.
we'll circle back when we talk about the book itself.
Okay.
So here's one of those hot button issues that have been going around, and we on the podcast have made our opinions quite known. What are your feelings on the third act breakup?
I'm old school, so I like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel, I'm not a just vibes reader. I have a hard time with those stories unless the voice is really entertaining. And
Hmm.
I do think some stories don't need a third act breakup. I found with my second chance romances, third act breakups don't always feel natural because it
Right.
kind of feels like we're breaking up again. I mean,
Hmm.
like maybe this isn't the best reunion. So I found with second chance romances, that's about the only time I don't see a lot of natural third act breakup coming into the
Right.
story. But
Well,
I
but like
really,
with your second chances, like your marriage and crisis book, like it takes a good chunk of, I mean, not necessarily for them to be physical, but it takes them a while to really come around back to their relationship itself. So I think not having the third act breakup in those, it makes sense.
yeah. it feels like, especially the marriage on the brink or the recently divorced, it
Yeah.
feels like those they need to weather something together to
Hmm.
cement their. So you have the will they or won't they questions still,
Yeah.
and some those have been the hardest. Like
Yeah.
the last marriage on the brink, I was like, we're not writing these again. I'm
Yeah,
not
but you
doing
do
this
them
again.
so well. That is like
It there, I'll get stuck.
Aiden and Kate, like they still
Yeah.
hold that top spot for me. Well, that's a Marie
And
Johnston book. Sorry.
and they're my top spot too.
For those of you who didn't know, I let the
Yeah.
cat out of the bag accidentally, that Marie Johnston is also Walker Rose. So
Yes, I am
anyway,
she. And both
sorry.
like second chance romances, but Marie was like, we can't keep writing these because I'd get behind. I'd rewrite the second half. Make me shiver. I rewrote. I don't know how, and I don't like to waste words. I do
Yeah.
not like to, um,
I
I just
tried so hard
gotta,
not to let the cat out of the bag. I really did. And it's Aiden and Kate's fault because I just love them so much.
yeah,
Make Me Shiver, I really enjoyed that story and the way that it played out, though. I think, and I continue to say, like, your second chances of marriage in crisis, like, they are some of my favorite ones because there's just something about the way that you treat those couples that it works. Because it's hard to write those stories in a way that makes sense and are successful.
yeah. And it's hard for me because I'm very, I don't like any other woman stuff. I always want it to be only her for him.
Yeah.
So to ruin a marriage, where they're both still likable, I guess,
Hmm.
is challenging too.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. So, what are your thoughts on miscommunication in romance?
My editors usually give me my thoughts when I try. I don't usually do a lot of miscommunication because I am very much a, well, let's talk this out and have a reasonable
Hmm.
conversation. And
Yeah.
usually my editors are like, you can't do this. You got to have a little more conflict. And so they're
Yeah.
trying to squeeze out a little more miscommunication.
Yeah.
And so I almost do more of a delayed communication. I'm trying to get better at where they don't tell each other everything right away,
Right.
based depending how their personality is. Um, and then I definitely don't like it to last the whole book.
Hmm.
And there's got to be a really good reason why they can't have a reasonable conversation.
Yeah.
So as a reader, I guess I don't always notice it if it's done well, but if it's, and I guess doing it well is subjective. But if I feel, you can feel when you, it's like, okay, now
Well, and
someone's being,
it's one of those things like I talk to enough authors that sometimes what they read and how they write are very different. Like they really enjoy something that won't necessarily feel that they're capable of writing, but that's why they enjoy to read it because it kind of takes them out of like what their safe space is, so to speak.
yeah.
So do you have a favorite trope to write? Oh, excuse me.
Second Chance is
Oh
my
yeah.
favorite. Yeah. And I like Enemies to Lovers. I don't know that I've done a lot of them. Um, and it was interesting because the editor that I've mostly done with Bourbon Sunset, book 6,
Okay.
and I have different editors. So my editor journey, I have two main editors for developmental editing. Um, because the editor I'd worked with for a long time went on maternity leave. So with
Hmm.
Make Me Whole, I started working with um, another editor. And then I think it was by the time my first editor, my first main editor was able to come back to work, it had been, I think I was in the middle of Oil Nights. So
Okay.
I'd done all the oil barons and I thought it would be better for me to stay with the same editors.
For
Um,
continuity.
and the same developmental editor, same copy. And it's hard because I like them both and they both were very good for me. And then the first editor was like, well, I have the whole year open. What have you got? And I had had this Bourbon Canyon series idea and I'd been
Hmm.
debating on starting a new pen name because I feel like I made so many mistakes with Marie that affected my brand long term.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure, always sure what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. So it was a nice start to be like, this is what I wish I would have done 10 years ago had I known what I'd have been doing. And I
Mhm.
knew nothing 10 years ago.
But
So
you were the same as so many authors out there.
yeah. And you learn so much.
Hmm.
And then it was hard too, because especially since the pandemic, you see a lot of newer authors just launch into the
Yeah.
stratosphere, and you're like, drying your tears every night after
Hmm.
watching, like, what did I do wrong? Um, so I thought, and I also didn't want to be bought from series to series anymore, like I did Marie when I was doing paranormal. And I had done that even with contemporary books. I jumped back and forth from different series, and then I had paranormal, and I felt like I just spread everything out too much.
Hmm.
Um, Sorry if this is
No, you're
switching
fine.
around here,
You're still fine.
but yeah, so I thought, well, this is my chance to launch a series because that editor was wide open for the rest of the year. So she's doing Walker and she did Bourbon Sunset, and she's like, this feels a lot like this other book. You might want to be careful. And I'm like, they're totally different, but they're enemies to lovers. And so now I'm like super paranoid. Like, do I do all my enemies to lovers the same? But I think it was because I mean, you'll meet the heroine in Bourbon Summer.
Hmm.
And um, yeah, so I like writing enemies to lovers, but I don't know. You don't get a lot of like true enemies to lovers, I feel, in contemporary either.
Yeah.
Somewhat. It's a lot of dislike to lovers.
Hmm. Or adversaries type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to find one, but it's also hard to find a good one. I don't always like an enemies to lovers book, but it's because it's hard to make it realistic and believable.
Yeah. And I have a hard time with enemies to lovers that are just them insulting each other. I
Yeah.
really do. My older daughter, she's like, that's what they like nowadays, Mom.
Yeah, it
I'm
is.
like,
I mean,
yeah, well, I'm old
some,
school and I don't like it
I
though.
mean, every once in a while I'll come across a book like that. And I'm like, yeah, I just really needed it at that moment. But it's like, because just
Yeah.
your mood takes you to the insults.
Yeah.
So let's circle into Bourbon Canyon. So
Okay.
Bourbon Summer is the newest release. It is book 5 of the Bourbon Canyon series. The release date is January 30th, 2025. Tropes are fake relationship. There is an age gap. It's boss employee, small town, and it is somewhat of a slow burn, not like obnoxiously slow, but slow enough that you're like, oh man. So what was the inspiration for this new series?
Um, I was in the theater watching Shazam 2, I think. And it must have
Shazam
been
2?
I think Shazam 2, right? Is
Like with
it?
Shaquille O'Neal, Shazam?
No, it's not Shazam. What is it? The superhero one.
I mean,
The Flash, because that's
m-
oh no, I'm gonna lose my
honestly,
street cred with all my
I don't
superhero
understand any of
family.
those. My boy child just started watching Spider-Man, so I don't know who's Marvel, who's DC. I know Batman is
Yeah,
DC, but that and
I know
Spider-Man is Marvel.
the Flash is DC.
I
So
think so.
is it Shazam? Oh no, I'm gonna have to look that up. And it wasn't like the most riveting movie, I guess. So um my mind wandered. And whenever, people ask, how do you write all these stories? And like the ideas are the easy part. I can get
Yeah.
an idea from a sentence I hear, I can come up with a whole book.
Hmm.
Um, those are plentiful. And there's a lot of foster kids in this movie. And I think that's what got my mind working
Okay.
over foster kids and then meeting as adults. And then what if you didn't recognize them? And what if and so I started coming up with this world of this family who fosters a lot. And it came from, so like Miles and Winter's characters kind of came to me first, and then the Bailey family. And then I kind of worked out from there because I kind of also have had a period of like an existential crisis, especially the last year of what should I be writing? Where does my voice work the best? Because it's just getting harder and harder, I feel, to make a living, depending on
Yeah,
how you're doing. And with two college kids and a third teen driver coming, things are just really expensive.
it
So I'm
is.
like,
Yes.
how do I best make a living? Do I need to get a job? Do I need to do this? And what do I like to write? And I kind of thought, because I can come up with like mystery and thriller plots too. But when it comes down to it, I don't want to sit down and write one of those. I
Right.
look forward to sitting down and write a romance. So it's like, okay, well, I like small town and I like the more Western settings. I like working close to home where I know a little more about the landscape and the setting. And then, but I wanted to keep North Dakota with Marie. And
Hmm.
I mean, who doesn't like Montana? But it's also close, so I can
Right.
do research there easier. And then I love the distillery and brewing worlds because my background is a microbiologist, and I did this food science minor that they like packed into a summer, and I was like an eternal student. I just love learning. And so when I did a brewery tour for the Reservoir Barrel and Make Me
Uh-huh.
Exhale, um, I was just fascinated. And my friend next to me was like, I'm not getting any of this. And I'm like, but it's so fascinating. And I love the same with distilling and stuff, even though I'm not a huge drinker at all, but I love the science and stuff behind it. So I do like writing in those worlds. And I thought, well, I'll make it a small town, you know. And I think distilleries are kind of becoming, they've always been around in books,
But
but
they're becoming more
definitely
popular.
see them a little more, yeah.
Hmm.
And it is a nice setting to put a family, to make a family
Hmm.
setting in. And then when I'm looking, because I dream of like squirreling Mr. Rose off and doing a research trip. And there's this one distillery in Bozeman that gives tours, and I really want to get there, but it's winter now, so that's not going to happen until winter's done. But and basketball and soccer. Hopefully in the spring we can get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a nice setting with a lot of stuff going on. Like there's just tons of distilleries everywhere. Everywhere we go, I try to see if there's a brewery or distillery we can stop into. And there is, even though we're not traveling far and wide. We're going to
Hmm.
like Spearfish, South Dakota for soccer. And I think they at least have a brewery. I don't think I've been able to go to a distillery, but
Yeah.
even in like right over the border in Montana in a small town, they have a brewery there.
Hmm.
And we just found one. We've been here in this town for almost 20 years, and I've driven by this old sign and I've just ignored it. And it's only like 6 months ago. My husband
You
goes,
actually read it.
do you know there's a brewery there? And I'm like, oh, I'm sure it's defunct. I mean, the sign's faded, you know?
Uh-huh.
But some friends of ours are like, no, it's a really good brewery. And I just got an email from him today because I emailed him asking if I could tour because it's so much easier to write when you've been exposed to this stuff.
Right.
And I have so many questions about the lingo and all of that. And he's like, we don't give official tours. Just sit at a table and make yourself known, and I'll tell you all about brewing. I'm like, that sounds perfect.
Uh-huh. You can ask all the questions.
Yeah.
Well, and I
And we
think
have
that's one of
several in
those,
town, but you just don't notice them.
well, and I think that's one of those things probably in the past 50, well, because there was a brewery that opened up when I was in college, and we're not saying how long ago that was. But I feel like in the last 15 to 20 years, like there have been a lot more like small batch brewers and
Hmm.
distilleries that have opened up because it's just people like that small business aspect to it.
Yeah. And the products, I'm most of my hard liquor experience was, right at 21 or maybe a little before if you're from a small town and drinking's part of the culture,
Yeah.
but I won't admit to that.
In the
Um,
field with no cell phones.
Worried about the cops coming on you.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I took my dad, there's a distillery in Fargo, and I asked my dad to go with me, and they just have a tasting room. and you walk in and you don't eat, you're like, there's just a bar in the middle of like this empty floor. I think they do events more than they have like an
Hmm.
actual tasting room, but they do tasting. They'll just come out if you walk in.
Right.
And he talked to us, I suppose, for a half hour, an hour. And that's where he taught me how to taste like bourbon, because
Uh-huh.
I had tried it once and about killed myself on the smallest sip.
Yeah.
And then he was telling me, he's like, no, you kind of got to shut your nose off. And I was like, well, thank you. Now I can actually taste stuff
Well,
in
that's the
this
thing, because
tasting
it's
room.
often quite pungent and not in a bad
Yes.
way, but it's like once it hits your nose and it's like that's all you get.
Yeah. And we tried gin there, and I'm not a big lover of alcohol, but they had cinnamon whiskey, and
Hmm.
I that was good. And they
Yeah.
used really, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, the Ceylon cinnamon, but and he was very down on the mass-produced cinnamon whiskeys.
Yeah.
Very not a fan of them. And I was like, I can see why, because that's quality
Hmm.
alcohol is a
Yeah.
lot different than the cheap stuff that maybe you just try to get as a young person. So it's been really interesting because when I started, I'm probably rambling off on a whole different subject, but when I
You're fine.
started like my newsletter, I'm like, what am I going to talk about? Because I wanted to do things differently.
Hmm.
And Marie is, North Dakota, my pets, and I don't really usually share a lot about my kids. And I thought of the irony that I'm not a big alcohol person, but I love the brewing and distilling worlds.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought, well, that'll be my thing, is trying cocktails and usually getting heartburn from them because I'm really not an alcohol person. But it's been fun, and it's forced us to go out, because there's been a lot of times I'm like, I got a newsletter this week. I don't have any cocktails.
We gotta go out.
And so we'll run out and grab a cocktail. And it's fun because there are these cocktails I've heard about my entire life I've never tried, like a
Uh-huh.
Manhattan, or I don't know if that's going out, if it went out today, but I tried an apple teeny and it tasted like if you soaked cardboard in apple juice and then squeezed
I
it out.
I can honestly say I've never had one of those. I always think of Scrubs and how like Zach Braff's
Oh,
character was a big fan of the Appletini.
oh yes, that's probably why I got so excited when I saw apple teeny on the menu. I was like, I'm gonna have an apple teeny.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever drank one, but anytime I see one, I always think of that because he
I'm
loved
gonna have to
them.
try another because this one was not good.
So let's talk about Ruby and Tenor. So
Okay.
Ruby, when we first meet them, Ruby is working at the bar and her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend comes in, who we find out actually was one of her good friends when she was growing up, and they have then invited her to their wedding. And she panics a little bit and says that she is not single and that her boss Tenor is her boyfriend.
Yep.
But
As
he,
one does.
as one does, but he thankfully takes it in stride and rolls with it.
Yeah. I came up, um, he was he was my I have gamers in the house, and they aren't really into Warhammer, but I really didn't have to. I would just ask them, I said, okay, I need to know a little bit about Warhammer. And pretty soon YouTube videos are getting pulled up and they're telling me
Hmm.
about these different games. So it's weird how in the know my gamers are about games they don't really play a lot.
Yeah,
Like we don't play Dungeons to Dragons, but my son knows a lot about it.
yeah.
And
Well,
yeah.
ironically, when I was reading the book, I was like, "Oh, Warhammer." So my oldest and his friends play Warhammer.
Oh, okay.
And so when people ask me like what it is, I'm like, so he will tell me this is not the way to describe it, but I say it is a mix between D&D and Risk.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because it has like the quest aspect to it, but then it has
Hmm.
like the domination aspect of Risk. But if you ask him, he's like, no, that is not it at all. But I'm like, that is the best way to describe it to people that don't have a clue.
Yeah. We definitely have Risk players in the house here.
Yes. Risk gets a little dicey in our house, so I don't like to play it. Also, I
I'm not a
usually
board game person, so we do puzzles.
see, I love a tabletop game, but I'm not the best loser. So it happens. But yeah, so Tenor himself, like he's a little bit nerdy
Hmm.
in the most delightful way. Like he plays Warhammer, but he's fairly insecure that you don't expect it. But as you learn his backstory, like he was bullied as a younger kid, and he just instead of standing up for himself, he just kind of took it. Now his siblings, on the other hand, did not just take it and stood up for him. So he's one of those characters where he has big hurts from his past, and he's still dealing with those as an adult.
Yeah. And I didn't want to make it was a hard balance of um, how much to delve into the bullying experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because I didn't, none of us want to sit there and relive our
Yeah,
horror moments in childhood that we don't want to think about.
right.
Um, but so I didn't want to dive in it too deep, and I wanted to show the effects of it. But I also remembered too being, because my brother was bullied, and there's 6 years between us. So I keep thinking, how mortifying was it for him when I would be like, yeah, well, and
Yeah,
I just stare into the person as like a third grader, not knowing what I was saying or anything. And I thought, I'm
right.
sure my brother was like, oh my gosh, please just stop.
Is he
Um,
older or younger?
older.
Okay,
And he was the one who'd just be quiet and just weather it.
right.
So I kind of wanted to, yeah, highlight a little more of that, I suppose. And then um, I liked kind of exploring Ruby's experiences because I think that is also really common
Mm-hmm.
where um, you're just close with someone and then the shift happens in high school. And
Yeah,
especially if they are in become in different peer groups.
yeah,
And also especially I feel like what a lot of us have experienced with like the blatant bullying, but also those insidious comments that you don't know
yeah.
are an insult until you're like
Oh,
years later,
wait.
sometimes
Yeah,
even like, hey, wait a minute.
yeah. It's like those
That's what you were
the
getting at.
backhanded niceness where it's
Yeah,
like, and they say it in such a way that they're saying it nicely and as a compliment, but it's not at all. And you're like,
right.
wait.
And that sometimes even the person saying it is oblivious to how insulting it is. And I think
Yeah,
sometimes, because in the movies, you know that they know.
yeah.
And I think sometimes in real life, and I'm probably giving too much of a benefit of the doubt because I do think some know, but I think some are truly clueless to like, you sure
Hmm.
you want to say it that way?
Yeah.
And if they knew, they might not care. But yeah, so it was a little kind of interesting to explore both aspects and
Hmm.
then how how they're dealing with it as they're
Yeah.
older.
Well, and that's the thing, like Tenor, like he kind of shuts down and like just hides himself. Like he still is very active in the distillery. Like he's a very intelligent guy. Like like spends time with his family. Like he has friends, but he has just closed himself off from a lot of like meaningful relationships and relationships in general in a lot of ways. And Ruby definitely deals with it differently.
Yeah. And I wanted them, I like how she was accepting herself in the way she was, but she wasn't comfortable with it because that's why her ex broke up with her.
Hmm.
You're not the fun one, or you're not super exciting. And she was okay with that, but she
Right.
wasn't okay with that.
Yeah. Well, and ironically, I read a book for another author spotlight who it was very much similar, like character wise, in the sense for like the hero or the heroine's ex-boyfriend wanted her to change her personality and like change so much, which is why he was an ex-boyfriend. But it was ironic that I read these two books back to back because a lot of the characters, like completely different stories and all those things, but there's a lot of similarities in the character development, which I thought was really great because it's like you have these four characters who are so similar but so different at the same time with the way they deal things. And I love the parallel of the two books with the way the relationships like exploded in the best ways. But I
Yeah.
do think that the fact that Ruby was this homebody, like I am 100% happy to sit in a corner with a book and nobody talk to me. Like that is me. Like I am Ruby and I really like that.
Yeah. And that was one reason why I'm not a big drinker because my only really exposure to it was through binge culture, where you
Yeah.
drink too much, you feel like absolute hell.
Yeah.
And then one morning, and I wasn't that old, I was probably only 22, and I wasn't that big of a drinker because I worked all the time.
Right.
Um, and I was in college and stuff, but I thought, I don't like feeling bad. I
Yeah.
don't like feeling icky. And then I kind of just I don't want to say more isolated, but it was I don't like the big social parties. I
Yeah.
didn't like, as a kid, I didn't like being in that pasture worried about being caught.
Hmm.
So I never had fun. So why am I going to do that? And then it very bit much became about just settling into what was comfortable for me. And
Right.
so even now where um when we go out for cocktail, you're probably not going to find me at a crowded bar with the music thumping because I can't hear.
Oh,
I
I
don't
can't.
read lips well. I
Yeah, I
don't
can't
want
do
to
that
be in that
either.
environment. If we
And then I
walk in and
think,
they're like
wow,
live band, I'm like, goodbye.
yeah, you're like, I walk back out,
Mhm.
which is honestly, I know there are people older than me that really like that kind of thing, but I'm like, yeah, you're old when you can't handle things like that.
Yeah.
I
And it
am
was
okay with
so,
that, by the way.
me too. And I have two friends that we meet every month. Um, and it is really nice that if you don't know, like we'll make a plan to meet somewhere, and then one of
Uh-huh.
them will be like, I think there's a band starting at 8. And then we're like, okay, where else should we go? And it's just really nice to know no one else
Uh-huh.
wants to be there either.
Exactly. Like you find that group of friends who are okay with the quiet and you're
Yeah,
good to go. Which sometimes like those loud like moments, like they're needed and necessary, but few and
yeah,
far between.
yeah. And they were much easier to endure when I was younger, and my
Oh,
ears weren't ringing all the time.
I know. It's horrible. It just keeps getting worse too.
Yeah,
Like I remember thinking when I was younger, like for your 40s, you're not that like that's really old. But like the closer I got to my 40s, I was like, oh, it's not that bad. But now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, I feel really old some days.
there are
Really old.
some, yeah. I felt that today with my taxes because it's QuickBooks. And I know a lot of people know how to use QuickBooks. I don't know how to use QuickBooks and I don't understand tax as well. I'm a science nerd because I can see science put together.
Mhm.
I don't, they're just lines and numbers for anything financial. And and I thought I can sit and pick up any program, TikTok came, well, I'll learn TikTok and I'll learn this and all, but I'm sitting in QuickBooks, like being a fuddy-duddy, like, this
Mhm.
is lagging. I don't want to do Why do I got to learn this? Why did the program change? I don't want to do
Yeah.
this.
I had moments like that too. But in the book though, like Tenor and Ruby, like they have like their like Saturday night hangout essentially, where they just kind of spend quiet time together. And I love that you do that because like there's so many times when you like talk to people and they're building a relationship. It's like, oh, we went here, we went here, we went here. And it's like all the things that they did, but they don't actually spend time, like quality time together. And I thought that it was really interesting that you created that quiet buildup with the two of them.
Yeah, it is. Um, I had a thought just leave, but
Yeah, that happened.
it's the small town
Hmm.
because, and what Tenor had said to the ex, because the ex and the former friend were moving from a bigger town to Bourbon Canyon, and they were
Yeah.
complaining about there's nothing to do, which if you live
And
in
how
a small
boring it
town
was.
or anywhere in North Dakota, anyone from outside North Dakota and most states are going to be bigger, most towns, a lot of towns are going to be bigger. They really complain about North Dakota and how there's nothing to do here. And
Uh-huh.
it's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine and my husband's, because it's like, well, is there that much extra to do in a bigger city? And there is, in a way. Businesses are open longer probably and later at night, and there's probably bands and stuff if you're into that. Um, but in small towns, you really are kind of limited with what to do sometimes.
Mhm.
And the more books I write in small towns, sometimes it's like, hey, do we have another county fair? You know, what haven't I done yet? Or what can I repeat without being redundant? And
Yeah.
um, but and I think we overthink that probably too much as a writer, like,
Yeah.
and maybe not as comfortable with and that might be why I struggled more, is because I think this book and why I struggled more is because I've had to rely less on external factors motivating
Okay.
my characters, and I've had to dig into them more and their motivations, which is usually what my editors are trying to get out of me.
Hmm.
Um, and I did have to do not as heavy of edits as I anticipated, but they were on this one because I had the main story there. But it was, even the edits were hard because she was just basically having me go deeper into the
Right.
character and explore him a little more, which is, I think, not my comfort zone, but it's
Right.
where I feel like I need to be more.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that the book came together really well. Like you would not think that you had a hard time writing this story because it seemed like it flowed start to finish and like the way that
Good.
they created the relationship. And I mean, yes, it was fake and they like build on that. And then I mean, it wasn't ever really fake because Tenor's like kind of had a thing for Ruby, which he talks about in chapter 2. So that's not a spoiler, friends.
Yeah.
Like he's kind of had a thing, but like the age gap has been there. His insecurities are there. Like he holds himself like, and that was one of the things like in his story where he talks about the ex-girlfriend that kind of was like the culmination of him starting to hide is the fact that he couldn't be himself. Like he hid so
Mhm.
much and she like said that he lied, but I mean he doesn't. He just doesn't show that side of himself. But I did not like her at all, the
Yeah.
ex. She was a horrid human being. Really, I didn't like any of the exes and that old
Yeah.
friend of hers. Like she was terrible too. There's a lot of villains in this story.
Yeah. I I've been trying to honestly do that a little more intentionally
Yeah.
because I noticed I've been doing a lot of reading now that I've discovered audiobooks, which
They're
I always knew were there,
wonderful.
but now that I discovered I could listen to them faster. And also my kids got older, so I have time to listen to stuff
Hmm.
when they're not around. And so I've been able to like dive into my own genre and just romance books more. Um, and I've noticed that there are a lot of like face-offs
Yeah.
with the nasty people.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's the stuff I'm out of touch with in real life because I'm so conflict avoidant.
Hmm.
So it's stuff I'm trying to lean into more.
Yeah. No, I thought that it worked really well. I like the fact that like when there was conflict, like they stood up for each other. And there's a piece of the story that goes full circle. And I really loved how Ruby treated it, but Tenor, like he did not react well. And I'm definitely not going to tell you anything about that because that will be a spoiler and you need to like listen, you need to read it for that
Yeah.
part. But I thought that was an interesting way to close that circle up.
And that was, I'll try not to ruin it too. That was something I debated about how to end because I knew who she would be. Um,
Hmm.
but I debated how to end it. But I was actually listening to a book, and I don't even know if I should, I don't think the book would spoil it, but just in case I won't say it.
Yeah.
But she resolved it pretty similarly, I guess.
Uh-huh.
And so that helped me feel comfortable because I wasn't the most comfortable, I think, with how I wanted to do it.
Okay.
Um, but then I read it was a Lucy Score book, and I was like, wow, if Lucy can do it, I'm gonna do
No,
should be
I
okay.
I really thought that that conflict resolution worked out really well because it does show that people do change.
Yeah. And it's my tendency, I know I like to straddle the line a lot. That's like should be my middle name, is I don't usually veer far one way on making like a character a super villain or a super
Mhm.
good guy. I really like the complexity, like not like George R. R. Martin complex characters, but that they're not all just good and not all just bad. So I
There's a
do
lot of
like,
gray, yeah.
yeah, I like exploring those areas a lot more. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't want to say any more and risk ruining it. But yeah.
I know. I feel like what I said kind of ruined it a little bit, but maybe not. So we'll see.
Well, it could be
But
because I asked my PA before I started writing it. I said, I think this is my idea. And she's like, that sounds awesome. I think that's great. And then she does my marketing analysis. And she's like, oh my gosh, that was such a twist I didn't see coming. And I was like, but I told you.
you're like, yay,
Yeah.
yay for that. Well, thank you so much, Walker
Thanks for
Rose, for
having
joining
me.
me. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me about Bourbon Summer.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, happy reading, everybody.
Find us on Instagram at Buzzing About Romance or on Twitter at Buzzing Romance. If you like the podcast, please leave a review. If you'd like to support us directly, join the Bookcase and Coffee Patreon and receive exclusive content only available to Patreon members. Check out bookcaseandcoffee.com for our on-the-shelf show notes.